Hello and welcome to the Team Superdad podcast. Today we are live with a guest, an awesome guy, a man called Anthony Willoughby. He is an explorer, an expert in Indigenous tribes, and a real character as well. As soon as I met him, I couldn't wait to get him on the podcast. We've had loads of chats, and he's here with us today. So without further ado, I'm going to bring him into the conversation.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good, sir. How are you?
Really well, thank you.
Brilliant. We met about a month or so ago, didn't we? And so
Certainly did, yeah, through a wonderful strange connection, which I think what life is all about, which is serendipity and never knowing where a conversation will lead.
Yeah, exactly. And people it would serve people well. I believe it serves myself well, and people should lean into this. Is when they have those, like I don't know, maybe as crude as passing someone in the street, but certainly on LinkedIn, lots of profiles come past me on the LinkedIn recommends or whatever, but you just get this feeling like you just noticed someone, and I noticed you, and then I was straight away looking at your description, and it was at the same time I was looking at rites of passage and different ways that fathers and their sons and fathers and their daughters pass on their experiences. And I shared with you when we first spoke about the experience I had at a American Indian powwow back when I was a teenager, and how that had really left a mark on me. I just had such an amazing weekend, and I was wandering around the Team Superdad courses because of my firewalking experiences. And I was thinking, well, what could dads do with their sons? What kind of rites of passage, what kind of lessons should we be passing on to our sons and daughters? And then there you were in my LinkedIn stream. So it's either as weird as they're all listening to us, or the universe is in our favor. It's bringing us together, and I'd like to think it's the latter.
Yeah.
Although increasingly it probably is Google listening to us all the time. So tell us a little bit about your. I mean, there's so many things that we could tell us about, but just introduce yourself first, and sort of who you are and what you do, and then we'll just literally dive back into your story and dig into this subject. But yeah, tell us who you are and what you do.
No, I'd be delighted. Well, I'm Anthony Willoughby. Thank you very much indeed. I've just turned 70, and I'm sort of life enthusiast, I think is how I would describe it. I'm dedicated to Churchill's definition of success, which is the success in life is stumbling from one disaster to another while maintaining one's enthusiasm. I've set up an organization called the Cock Up Club, when we get together to celebrate the wisdom of life experience. As a small boy, I was brought up in Africa, educated in this country, never understood a thing about what was going on here. When it's told, fortunately, I was far too stupid to go to university, but would I like to go to the States for a year? Did that, hitchhiked around South America. And then at the age of 22, I hopped on the Trans-Siberian Express with 30 British agencies. I had a stall on the Bayswater Road selling bamboo hair slides and everything else. And I just wanted to get out of this country. And so I spent the next 30 years living in Japan. But I think, rites of passage is a fascinating idea. And I think for me, some of my main lessons on that was when I saw that when back in the early 70s, late 60s, a play came out called Hair. And the women were naked on it and the men were naked. And it was really, really sort of avant-garde. And I was still at school, and I went to the Shaftesbury Theatre and I watched this play. And I thought, wow, fantastic. So I went backstage, or I went to the stage door, and I saw the door was slightly ajar. And I pushed it open a little bit, and then a little bit further. And then I saw some of the hair cast. And I said, could I take a photograph, please? And I said, yeah, of course. Please, I need some photographs for my playbill of hair. And from sort of that moment onwards, I've always tried to push doors that are half ajar open, because you never, ever, ever know what's on the other side. And I think that's the most important lesson in life I had, is always, always pushing that door that is half open, and there are extraordinary things on the other side.
Having that, like a willingness to simply explore, or a willingness to ask questions.
I think it's a willingness to trust yourself. I mean, I've done about 40,000 miles of hitchhiking all over the world, and that really started in the States when I started hitchhiking out during the spring break. And what I saw really in hitchhiking, you've got a sign saying, "Trust me, I am trustworthy," because it's a two-way trust. And I think that is something we've forgotten. And I've done, as I say, 30, 40,000 miles of hitchhiking. I've never, ever had a bad experience.
Yeah.
And I think the most important thing in life is to realize most experiences are going to be good. It's having that trust in yourself. How do you provide that trust in yourself? And that's really been my sort of quest, what I've been working on during my life, is to try to understand what freedom of choice gives me. Because I believe we really are, and I certainly am, the first generation to have the freedom of choice to shape my own destiny. My father, grandfather, great-grandfather, the only thing they could do in life was to join the British Army. It was their duty. It was their manifest destiny. And I had that freedom. And I think that's, for all of us, what is a huge challenge in life, is what do we have to learn about ourselves, Mother Nature, human nature, and our own potential if we want to enjoy that freedom of choice.
Wow. I mean, as a 46-year-old man, it's very easy to lose sight of those, of that very recent history, and so you sit here, you've just so eloquently put it, we have these choices, so many choices, and yet many people in the world today will be talking about how they feel restricted, or they have, it's not fair, and I don't know, blimey, but ranging from loneliness to depression to money troubles. And actually, just in the space of 100 years, what you've pointed out is we've gone from no choice to maybe it's too much choice.
Yeah, I'm not quite 100 yet, but I totally agree with you.
Grandfather, great-grandfather.
Yeah, I mean, my father had absolutely no choice. I mean, he tells me, he used to salute his toothpaste mug with King George on it, when he was 9 years old. That was his duty every morning before he cleaned his teeth. He was serving the king. And though that gave you no freedom, it gave you identity. Yes. And I think this is the whole thing of freedom of choice is frightening because it comes with responsibility. And therefore, what is that responsibility? But what is your community? And until you can define your community, where can you belong and be recognized? Which is obviously what I've been learning from Indigenous communities around the world, which is how do you define your identity by knowing where you fit into their territory?
And do you think that's, you see it in Indigenous tribes, but also more traditionally in our culture, people had those defined roles: butcher, baker, candlestick maker. Yeah. Whilst that doesn't give you as many choices, does it make life easier? It's less stressful, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still reasonably convinced that it's only about 5% of people that really want to do something and hustle life.
Yeah.
I mean, I really do. Life is definitely freedom of choice to self-select yourself to what you're going to do in life. And I think so many people just are quite happy to have excuses, to be a victim. I mean, talking about the COVID thing, I'm sure you listened to people talking webinars right at the beginning, 6 to 8 months ago. Oh, first you get angry, then you get depressed, then you get this, then you get that. And, I just had to stop people in their tracks and say, look, I spent a lot of time in Mongolia and East Africa. And in Mongolia, there's a particular expression. I can't repeat it, what it is in Mongolian, but basically the translation is, shit happens. Get on with it. And, I think we've got to address it. Yes, obviously it's affecting me in many, many, many different ways. But I think, now stability, security, certainty, structure, all of this status and arrogance, they no longer work.
Yeah.
So people are no longer really that impressed by your BMW or you've got director on your name card. And I think this is a glorious time for people to have to work out who they are. What are their importance? What are their priorities? What are they trying to do with their lives? And I think that is part of it, is looking at what your family is. What are your values? What are our blessings?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So where do people, maybe you know this from your own experience, or maybe you've seen it done in different ways. Where do people go to start? They're going to start to identify themselves. Where do they start with that?
Well, I mean, I do a methodology called territory mapping, where you get people to sort of draw their territory. And this sort of really originated because I went on a camel safari in northern Kenya. And each evening, the Maasai would sort of wander into our little community. But what I saw is they had absolute presence. They had substance without arrogance. And what I realized my entire education was, how could you be massively arrogant with minimum substance? And my school also perfected effortless insincerity. And those, in my opinion, the only two things that it actually perfected.
Yeah.
And so I went on this camel safari and I became fascinated. What do these people have that we don't? And that's when I then went off to Papua New Guinea. I met the ambassador in Tokyo. He said, why don't you go to my village? So I went off to his village in the highlands of New Guinea when they were still running around with feathers, headdresses, and
what year are we talking?
1980.
Right.
The highlands of Papua New Guinea. And I saw them wearing feathers. I said, so why do you have so many feathers? They said, well, a big man has many feathers, but a bigger man can hand out his feathers. And I started to see that that was leadership. But there were so many people in Tokyo I'd spoken to where I was living at the time who thought that power was leadership. If I keep all the power, I will be more successful. But in an indigenous community, it is handing out your feathers. That is true power, the ability to contribute to your community. And then I asked about the spear. Why do you have a spear? They said, well, you have to earn it. You can't buy it. You can't sell it. You can't give it away. You have to earn that spear. And the whole idea is leadership is earned. And I'm not sure whether you saw this morning about a hero in Afghanistan who is going to sell his medal. And the troops that he was with in Afghanistan don't mind that he got the medal, even though they're not quite sure he deserved it. But the idea that he will sell the medal for profit is so disgusting. And I think this is the same thing of trying to sell your spear. Have you really earned it? So when I got back to Tokyo, I became fascinated by feathers, spears, and the shield you have. Who will protect you? How do you protect yourself? And that all comes from contribution. And when I asked the ambassador in Tokyo, what's the most important thing in his life, thinking he'd say his family, his community, he said, no, it is my territory. And he drew a map showing where his village was. And he said, from the age of 3, I was taught to protect my territory. And therefore, I know my duty and I know my aims and ambitions. And what I've discovered, inside everybody, there is a map. And once you start drawing a map of your territory, you start to get clarity. And more importantly, when you start drawing the line, you start to see your leadership journey. You start to see where people started to follow you and why. And you can start to articulate what is important. Because once I have seen someone's map, you can't unsee it. And that's why so few conversations today have any context, because nobody really knows what they're talking about, because they are words that are unconnected. If that makes sense.
Yeah, is that like they're not really present to what's going on around, and they're not really thinking?
We're not really present, but they just don't know, because as I say, for the first 99.9% of human existence, every conversation we've had would have had relevance. Today we're going hunting crocodiles. There's too much weather, rain, we can't cross the river. So we understand the problem we're trying to solve. But everything today is nebulous. We've got, the coronavirus crisis. What does that mean to you? And everybody's perception of how they see it is different. Is it a real enemy? What is it? So that's why it's so difficult for words and conversations, because there is nothing embedding what we're talking about. I mean, that's why soccer and all these other things are so interesting. The goal, we know the ball got in the net, right? That is a result. And I think that's why sport is so interesting, because there is an actual result and we have a context of conversation.
Got it. Yeah.
That's what I think we've really lost in our own lives. What does it mean to be a successful father? What does it mean to be successful in life? And I've got a whole program I'm working with schools in Dubai and elsewhere. But is your leadership journey to a successful life? Define what a successful life is. And how do we articulate the success is having your family, contributing, feeling valued. And I think we have to redefine success at the moment. And I think we have a fantastic opportunity to do it. But I think that comes back to knowing your territory, knowing your community and where you contribute.
So foundational work inside of you. Your
I think it is, but it's just simple. It's just what is it what's your territory? Because it gives you hope. It gives you belief. What is the river I'm going to cross next month? Where do I have to get to? You can start to articulate what you have to achieve.
So by territory, do you mean like literally your location, or where, or your people that you're in?
Well, to an Indigenous person, they will draw their sort of their territory, where they're hunting and what's going on. But what I've discovered, inside everybody, they can draw a map showing rivers, deserts, mountains, and swamps. It is so deep in our psyche that you just give someone a blank sheet of paper. What is your territory? Where do you see the hope, the journey? What are the waterfalls? I mean, I can show, many examples of this if people would be interested in it. And they try. Well, no, I'll sort of let them try it. I mean, I think it'd be a bit difficult to show it now, but at some point I'd love to show you the maps and how that works if people are interested.
Totally. We'll put in the notes for this, if you're listening to this on the podcast, I'll put all the notes and links to Anthony's work, and I'll also in the Facebook or YouTube conversation, I will post some links. What I will do now is I'll post Anthony's website link in the chat.
There's not it's just, as I say, it's a sort of friendly chat. I just love to talk to people. Please give them my email. Let's have a talk. I mean, this COVID thing, as I say, has provided masses of opportunities. But I just think one thing, talking about you and thinking about sort of being a father and everything else. I mean, obviously, I've got kids who are, in their 30s and also in their late 20s or mid 20s. But when I was educating them, my father I said, how should I educate my children? He just simply said, make sure they play sports at which they can get seriously hurt.
Yes, good.
And that was his only real advice.
Do you know,
and though that might sound strange, I really didn't focus on their academics. I really didn't. I just wanted to know how well they played rugby. Did they do it with verve? Because I think the future really, really is about having that ability to adapt. Really to be clear of where you are, where you're trying to go. Then you've got to be bold when you want to. And that is really freedom. Because freedom, I believe, is simply a state of mind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's deeper than what I did last week, but very, very true. Well, I made a video last week about doing dangerous things with your kids, and it was fireworks night, and my boy's 11, so he wants to burn, and if I leave a lighter around, next thing I can smell something burning, so it's bonfire night, it's firework night. We're on lockdown anyway, so I just had a few family-sized fireworks for our backyard. But I let them light the firework, which some might think is ridiculous, but they're going to do it behind my back with no guidance, and even more so if the thought is, oh, this is something I'm not allowed to do. This is something something I'm not old enough for yet. They're going to be more motivated to do it if I don't let them than if I actually engage in that thought they're having and say, right, here's the fireworks. We're going to do this safely now. And they bloody enjoyed it. And it was a little bit hair raising at times, but I totally agree with you and believe that we should do dangerous things with our kids.
I think we've got to. I mean, my children have been staying with me in mud huts since the age of 8. Because I spent a lot of time with Indigenous people, and they used to come on my research trips. So we'd literally sleep in mud huts, go out, get 30 feet from 40 feet from elephants, wandering around. But the main thing was, and also I think if I mentioned, but when my children get to 16, I send them to live with the Maasai. I send them to Africa with a mate for about 6 weeks. When they do whitewater rafting, they stay with the Maasai. But most importantly, well, that's for a week when they really do wander out and they get fairly close to elephants and generally have a good life. They also got the stories for the girls, you know, when I drank the blood, when I killed the goat. Now, this might sound barbaric, but this is what children have been doing since time began.
Yeah.
So I think we have to encourage our children to be brave, to recognize courage. You know, watching kids on skateboards, God, how do they do it? I mean, I've got nothing but admiration for them.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to start admiring our kids when they show courage, because that's what they're going to need going forward. Yes, maths is important, but courage, I believe, is what we're going to need, especially now, and to have your own dynamic direction of where you're going.
Yeah. It's actually in schools now, the opposite is all too common, because they're so academically driven on the one hand, but they're also so terrified of something bad, in inverted commas, happening to children. You know, my daughter has wanted to make YouTube videos since she was 4 years old, and she kind of does, but the school have got so up in her head about it's dangerous to be online that she's now caught between this weird feeling of, I can see lots of other kids making these things on YouTube and I want to do it, but my school's telling me it's bad to. And I've been having to say to them, it's only bad if you do it in a, you know, it's only risky if you do it in a stupid way.
Correct. And that's what they got to try, the 1% of idiots. You know, I'm famous talking to my kids about drugs. I said, for God's sake, I got nothing whatsoever against you taking drugs. That's fine. I mean, you know, please go and do it. You know, I haven't done much, but I mean, you know, but the only thing that's problem is if you get caught, you get a prison record. If you get a criminal record, your life can be, you can't, certain countries you can't go to, etc. So don't do it, not because it's bad for you. That's fine. How can I, drinking alcohol, say don't take drugs? I mean, you know, etc. So how on earth can we try to get the kids to do something because we tell them they shouldn't do it? The only thing you can tell them is if you do it, you're going to break the law, and that's probably not a sensible thing for your life.
Well, I had the same conversation with my stepson. When he was 16, 17, he was asking me questions about smoking weed, about cannabis. And he was asking me in a way like, what do you think? And do you know? And I said, look, pretty much any friend of mine you've met, including myself, has smoked weed, and probably more than them was sensible.
Yep. Right.
So, and I said to him, I'm not going to tell you it's good or bad. In fact, I'm going to tell you straight up, I've had some of the funniest times of my life smoking weed and taking drugs with my friends. Yeah. This is what your friends won't tell you. When your friends are passing it to you and encouraging it to you to do, they won't tell you what to do if you've had too much, or what to do if you feel sick, or what to do. So given that you're asking me this, I'm going to tell you all that stuff now.
Yeah.
But now I know that if he does, you know, go to a party, he's going to, in his mind, he's going to be better equipped to know what to do. And best of all, if something does go a bit wrong, if he's not feeling very well, he's got the confidence to call me.
Yep.
Which is all I ever want to know, is that if one of my kids needs me, I'll be there.
Yeah, and probably he's also got the trust if something goes wrong for a mate of his, you'll also be able to go and help them out because their parents might not, and they'd be too terrified. So, no, I absolutely agree with that.
No
I,
kid, no kid didn't do something because their parent told them not to.
yeah, of course they will.
More
But I
like,
mean,
Dad said I'm not supposed to do this. I probably should then.
but I think the thing that the kids really, really, really hate is hypocrisy.
Yeah, yeah.
I really do. And I mean, in Kenya, this is why I spend a lot of time with the Maasai and the nomads, from the age of 3, they get, you've got 3 goats to look after for 3 meters for 3 hours. I mean, obviously they don't necessarily have time, etc. So they know from an early age what they're responsible for, what they have authority over, and who they're accountable. So all through their life, then they become a warrior. Or so therefore they then know their responsibility is look after the goats, to be brave. And again, it's all around respect, responsibility, courage. And then they move on from the spear to becoming a junior elder. And at that point, they get told, you no longer need the spear. We know that you are brave. And I always remember once seeing a scar on a Maasai's face. I said, why do you have a scar? He said, it shows I am a gentleman because it shows I can withstand pain. So I never have to be aggressive because people know I am brave. And this whole idea of known for courage. And that seems to be what is so important. And then you move, though, and I've been to the ceremony when they move from being a warrior to being an elder. It is 4 days of them being told their responsibility, authority, and accountability has changed. That is the journey to leadership. The leadership journey remains a journey, but the most important thing is how on that journey your responsibility, authority, and accountability changes. And that's what I've tried to do with my children, is to look at this leadership journey. When you leave school, when you leave university, when you get a new job, you always have the same mountains of self-doubt, of resilience or resistance. You also have, the swamps you have to get out of. It is a circular journey that you keep coming back to. And the most important thing is how you adapt and how your responsibility, your authority, and your approach to life changes, and how people seeing you reacting to it.
And as a community, you've seen these communities operate. Those stages of life, are people more comfortable, more confident in those stages of life? They're more settled in those stages of life?
Yeah, and I think this is where everything, there's a yin and a yang. Okay. So, yes, they've got the respect, the responsibility, and the values. But yes, again, it's restrictive. It's a bit like the English society or the system. I mean, you split. Civilization exists by splitting power, wealth, and status. And you're always chasing the third one. My father's in the British Army in India, tiny bit of status, 0 wealth, tiny bit of power. But I remember once speaking to one of the children of the emperor in Japan. And, he is literally a living god.
Right.
And he went off to America, etc., and he'd been to Canada. And so I said, gosh, when you come back, I mean, do you sort of, it must be an amazing being. And he said, no, they confiscate my passport when I get back to immigration. So could you imagine being a living god with no power? So, this is the thing. I think this is why we need to look at, which I like about the Indigenous people. They have the power of their own personality. They have the wealth of their life experience, and they have the status that they can contribute. And I think if we know that we are growing as an individual, we can contribute to a community. That, I think, gives us peace of mind and identity.
Growing as an individual and contributing to our community. And practically living in England, right, or wherever people are listening to this around the world. We've got a lot of listeners in America as well as the UK. Now, can that be as practical as volunteering in your community?
I think basically what you're, I think what you're doing. No, I think basically what you're doing is phenomenal. You're creating a community of people to give them hope. They're all crossing their rivers, looking at the mountains, looking at the children, guiding them with it. You're playing an incredibly important role in the community of giving people hope. And I think what you have done and how you've done it for yourself and others, that is what I think people need to think about. The community isn't necessarily volunteering. It's where you're going to be respected and how you're going to be respected from what you do, which is how you behave and how you treat people. That's what I've loved about our conversation. You have created an extraordinary avenue to give people hope. What more can be more valuable for you or for the community?
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that. That's.
But it's true. I mean,
I get it. But in our culture, we don't often get acknowledgements very often, and conversely, people aren't necessarily that good at taking acknowledgements to actually listen to what's being said and accept it. So I genuinely am grateful to hear those words. Thank you.
No, but you're playing the role of an elder. You know what you're responsible for, which is for your community. So you've got the authority. You show respect for everybody, respects each other. Everybody who joins has got to have courage. So they know what they're responsible for. So you've got the respect, the responsibility, and the courage. That's peace of mind, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. Wow. As you're saying that, I'm really thinking about how we can parent, respect, responsibility, and courage, putting that into our kids, or giving our children space for that to be something they take on board. Courage, we talked about doing dangerous things. I think that's important. Also courage in speaking up.
Oh God, yes. Public
Having
speaking, that's the number one thing people are terrified of. Get people talking. I mean, I got wonderful interviews with Joseph Nombre from Papua New Guinea, the ambassador, and he remembers first contact. But his rule in life is a leader has to be able to have oratory skills.
Sorry, 1 second, Antti. Just to be clear, you're talking about first contact. That's the day their tribe made first contact.
First contact in about 1948 in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, and he remembers it.
No, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps you saying that.
Yeah.
People become so disconnected to history. And we're talking 40 years ago, so 80 years ago, which is one lifetime really.
Yeah.
And these people had no contact with the outside world, and you're meeting someone who's there and experienced that. So sorry, please.
Yeah. And he's the one who taught me about territory.
Right. Okay.
He was the one. This is the ambassador, from Papua New Guinea. He left as a small boy, and how he rose through the ranks is amazing. But that's why his words I find are such wisdom, because they're not clouded by our Western what is right or wrong. It is just what is right to be a dignified human being. And that I've discovered is the same in Mongolia, in East Africa, or in Papua New Guinea. It is that ability to contribute. And that is what we seem to have lost. But he talked about the most important thing for leadership is the ability to have oratory skills. So I think, yes, I agree. Getting children to step up, to speak, to articulate their hopes and their dreams, that is the ultimate beginning of leadership. And that's what I'm trying to do on these programs I'm running with Dubai, to give the children the mental resilience, the mental machinery to have a successful life, to define the life skills they need, and realize most or 99% of that is below the line. It is not their maths score. It is who they are. And that's what I think we have to recognize.
Yeah.
And also in Africa, they always say the small boy is the first to spot the hyena. We've got to listen to the children talking about the most important things and maybe seeing things that we haven't as adults, and how we can work with them, especially now with all of these challenges everybody faces.
Yeah. And do you think the wisdom of indigenous tribes is being lost is, you know.
Yeah, it's being totally and utterly lost. I mean, it's just sort of the normal enslavement. They want to enslave everybody. I mean, we're all enslaved because, you know, our trusts in ourselves and others are deliberately diminished by the system. So, yes, I mean, nomads always terrify governments because they can't be taxed, but also it's a state of mind.
Yeah.
Yes, we're losing it. I mean, if you think the Chinese built 20,000 miles of walls over about 3,000 years to keep the Mongolians out, because the Chinese believe the more you own, you know, the more important you are and the more cluttered your life can be. Whereas to a nomad, the less you have, the more you are. Because they've got that freedom, that ability to move and ability to adapt. And I think that's what we need to realize. Freedom is the ability to adapt. And therefore, yes, all the wisdom is being lost. And that's why I enjoy talking to them so much. It will be gone. We will all be enslaved.
Yeah. Sorry, this is deep stuff. It's making me think about Indigenous, you know, Australian Indigenous,
Yeah.
New Zealand, obviously the American Indians across North
Yeah.
America, and Canada. I mean, I wonder what the world would look like if more of those tribal lessons, rites of passage, the history there. I wonder what the world would look like if that had been not just treasured but actually incorporated into modern life.
Yeah, it's rather intimidating for most people to actually have to realize that A, they might have to listen to someone, you know, who doesn't own as much as them and has got wisdom and insights. So I entirely agree with you that it is yes, it is intimidating, and it's taken me 40 years since I first went to Papua New Guinea. And I started to see the feathers, the spears, the shields, knowing your territory. It's taken 40 years to start to build this bridge of relevance to people. And finally, people, in 1988, I wrote up, I will set up an organization that is going to unlock trust and willpower in people. That was based on my journeys and expedition. Trust and willpower. Back in 1988, everybody went, yeah, great idea. Finally, 33 years later, people are saying, wow, trust is important. I've just read it in a Harvard Business Review. Yeah, I mean, it's been with us since time began. If you don't trust yourself, others, and the laws of Mother Nature and our environment, how can we be fulfilled? You know, how is that possible? I don't believe it is, because we've lost the value of trust.
In ourselves or in others or in all of it?
Oh, I think in all of it. I mean, our entire education system is not about giving people trust. It's about making them feel inadequate and insecure. You know, it really is. I mean, this is why I always admire the idea of a butcher or a baker. They can actually do something and make something.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing we can do. We're not educated to do anything useful.
No, not at all. I'm screwed. If Armageddon comes,
Yeah.
screwed. I literally am screwed.
You know, how do you make a hut? How do you do this? How do you bow and arrow? How do you hunt an animal? We can't do anything. And to me, it's almost deliberate enslavement. It really is. Whereas again, the nomads, I remember being up in the Arctic with some Inuit, and there were some BBC cameramen up there making a documentary. And the Inuit asked them, how do the cameras work? And they said they didn't know. And the Inuit were absolutely, totally confused that anybody would have something that they didn't know how it worked. Because if you don't know how something works in that community, you die.
Yeah.
Now I just sort of digress again with another Maasai story, but I remember being up in northern Kenya with the Maasai up there, and I said, "So can you take me to leader? Who's your leader around here?" And they looked at me in disbelief, and they said, "What is the problem that you're trying to solve? Because we have many leaders. Tell us what the problem is, and we will find the most appropriate person to come up with the solution." And, and I think if you think about, everybody looks to their father for the answer, or they look to themselves for the answer. No, that's not the best answer often. It is knowing who you can talk to, who will provide you with the best answer.
Yeah. Is there a, when you're approaching it sounds like you've explored the world, right? Am I right in picturing you walking up to Maasai tribe, or these Inuits? You don't know them, you've not seen them before. You're just Anthony, and you're approaching them.
I'm here. Hello, welcome. Can I come and sit down with you? Just there.
What's that feeling like? You've traveled, you've walked, you're
hop out of the car, been on a camel, turned up in their huts in Mongolia. The girls are open. You can go in and help yourself. Oh, yeah. I always turn up. Hello, I'm here. And in the tribal lands, that's a natural way. Anybody you see, you welcome. It's just,
Any intrepidation there, or are you excited about what's going to happen next, or both?
No, I've always just walked in. Hello, I'm here. It's fine. I've never had a problem. Yeah. I mean, that's in Kenya, Papua New Guinea. Yes, in Papua New Guinea, that is still pretty wild, etc. And someone said, please come to my village. And I said, yeah, I need to meet your leader first. I need to meet your chief, because you really want to be careful on that. And I remember, again, in Papua New Guinea, when we walked across it from the Fly to Sepik rivers, about 180 kilometers, we had some carriers who were carrying our stuff, and we got to a small stream, and they would not cross that stream because they knew they'd get eaten on the other side. And, the sort of concepts of territory. But, now I've never felt under any sort of real problems. It's just getting out there. I mean, still, I'm 70. I'm still falling off wild camels. A couple of years ago, I did that. And a couple of years ago, I was also joining nomads on their migration through the Altai Mountains. And again, that was fabulous, being with a family, 500 head of livestock, minus 30. They've got to move their herd 120 kilometers. But just being with a group of people, we know what we're doing. We know why we're doing it. We know how we're doing it. And we have the courage and confidence to adapt to it. And that was just a glorious sense of focus. They were absolutely clear. They were bold. And they had that sense of freedom of knowing what they were doing and their purpose. And it was a wonderful experience.
And so positive, I imagine, for I don't know what the younger generation there are like, whether it's like teenagers and stuff. There's what's
yeah, it is the
responsibilities. There's teenage boys and girls, and they're following their parents.
Yeah, they're all part of it, following in their footsteps. How much longer they will do that for, one doesn't know. And again, it's, this is what's being lost. But again, it's not for you or me to say, hey, they want to move out of their mud hut or their gur or something like that. I mean, Jesus Christ, I tell you, I mean, you spend 4 nights in a mud hut in Kenya, you are exhausted.
Yep.
No water, no nothing. They've got to carry the water. And you think, well, yeah, I understand they want a better life than that. And that is obviously their own dichotomy. And Emmanuel Mankura, my Maasai friend, speaks about it at length, of how do you deal with adaptation? How do you adapt to the current environment while maintaining your values? And I think that's a question for us, is how do we create our values while adapting to the environment we find ourselves in? And do we have to redefine them as our territory becomes disrupted?
Yeah. And that level of consciousness is a very practical exercise. I mean, inside of Team Superdad, I've got a values exercise, which is explore your own values, be clear on your own values.
Yeah.
Which isn't anything complicated or, ethereal woo-woo out there. It's just get clear on what you stand for and what feels right to you, so that you can relate to other people, you can connect with like-minded people, you can know what doesn't work for you, what does work for you.
And it is really, really, really clear and simple. And that's why I love talking to Indigenous people, because they know it. There's no bullshit about it. I mean, someone sent me, could I join some panel? And it literally was about 15 words of absolute gibberish. I mean, it really was. It was psychological, environmental, something, which is to do with education. And I wrote back saying, look, I'm really sorry. This is total bullshit and jargon. We've got to start calling it. We've got to start, everybody wants you to be a victim. Oh, when were you a victim in your life? Oh, it must be your mother's fault. God, I've been a victim often, but it's always of my own stupidity.
Yes.
And I think we've got to start stopping letting other people, play with our minds. We've got to start enjoying our own selves.
Yeah. Totally. Taking responsibility at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's simply, and enjoying life.
Yeah.
Enjoying being alive. We have freedom. We have freedom.
Well, that's the essence of your cock-up club, right? That is,
is
to celebrate the cock-ups, to celebrate the...
Yeah, it is. I mean, I can tell you why I set it up. When I came back from Japan about 20 years ago, I sort of came back, tried to settle in England. And I'd meet people, I'd talk about exactly what we've been talking about. And they'd say, it's really interesting. Here's my card. When can we meet for lunch? So I ring them up next day. Fantastic meeting you. When can we meet for lunch? And it happened twice over 10 days. Someone said to me, two people said to me, you are the most boring little man I've ever come across. How could I possibly be interested in your ideas about what you could learn from Africans? I mean, I'm very successful. I've got my own company. Really, I thought you realized when I said, yeah, let's meet for lunch, that you knew that was the only way I could terminate the conversation. So, I mean, that really happens. I was with a mate of mine. I thought, Christ, I'm speaking English to people, I can't understand them. And I think this is the whole thing in life. We don't understand each other because there are so many nuances. So I then sat down, what do we have to do to find people who think like us? So that's when we set up the Cock-Up Club. Right. And that is literally, I would have cards printed saying I was chairman of the Cock-Up Club. So I either got, when's the next Cock-Up dinner? Or, hey, I don't do cock-ups. But it's the only way, because how do you get people who've got the right attitude? I mean, so many people today have wolf spray for sheep. Hello, I'm very successful. But when you listen to them, at the end of the day, they're just going, bah, bah. Now is no longer the time for wolf spray for sheep. And that's what I think is so exciting now. And children to learn that it's not around their academics, it's around their ability to communicate. It's the ability to contribute to their friends, to their peers, to work on projects. And that's where I really, really hope the future is. And that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And just finally, because you just mentioned that, right? What can a man do to sort of pull that brave sense out of him? Like if particularly in the world we live in today, right? We're all a little bit sort of henpecked by life. The sense of adventure and our own masculinity is a little bit lost or faded. In your experience, and maybe I know some of the programs you run and stuff, like what can the average guy do to tear some just tear some strips off himself, to reveal a bit more of that stronger, the wolf, to be the
well, yeah, but I also think the whole idea of strength, humility is strength.
Right.
I really, really passionately believe it. Good leadership is the humility of authority. Good leaders have earned their spears. And I think it would be exceptionally arrogant of me to think that I can give people advice on this. It's just some of the things I've done with my own life. But really sort of drawing out my own territory, seeing what I appreciate, working with others. And as you're doing with your group, I mean, getting fathers together, not really to introspectively what's right or wrong about themselves, but to think of a bridge they can cross together. Think of, a journey they can go on together. That is what I think people can do. It's far more around talking to people about what are we going to do together than trying to do it on your own. Because I'm useless at doing things on my own. Whenever I'm feeling negative or whatever, I know about 3 or 4 people I can ring up. Hey, let's plan this journey. Let's go and have a glass of wine. Let's move. And so you've got this lovely sort of dynamic of movement from where we are. And I think it's creating that dynamics. And I'd love to talk more about the mapping if that could be helpful for people at some point. And I'd be delighted to do that.
Well, listen, this is we reached sort of the top of our chat.
Yeah.
Just do that. Tell people about the Nomadic Business School of Business and what you do for people.
I mean, it's really around just getting people to think about their leadership journey in life.
Right.
My program with students now is really what your leadership journey to a successful life. Starting to get them to define what does successful life mean. And then I've got people like Nelson Mandela's prison guard, who's an amazing bloke called Christo Brand, Rebecca Stephen, who's climbed Everest and the 7 summits, amazing first British woman to do it. Krishna, who is a Gurkha, joined the Gurkhas, invited to join the SAS, then went on to climb Everest 3 times. And those are the people that I want to talk to students about what is a successful life. How did they get through their mountains of self-doubt? How did they cross their limiting belief rivers? How did they get out of the swamp of being stuck in a dead-end situation? And that's what I want children to hear about. How did they get through it to give them the hope that they can see their own routes through it? So that's really what I'm working with students on. I'm now developing this for individuals as well to use it in their own lives. And then for corporates, using the mapping to obtain some clarity of what's important. Because it all starts with a map. It all starts with knowing where you are, where you're going, and how you're going to get there. And that is what most of us have been robbed with or from, that we haven't had that clarity. Because up until now, really, it hasn't been necessary, because everybody goes into an office. Everybody's far too busy to actually have to think about anything. And now is the time to think. And that's why I think finally, and then, to be honest, this last 8 months has been a massive opportunity. It's been the most exciting time of my life, because finally people are realizing you have to trust things and you have to unlock your willpower to see things differently. So for me, it's been a really, really exciting time of opportunity. And if anybody would like to talk to me about this, please get in contact.
Well, I'm sure they will. So that, and your email address is anthony@nomadicschoolofbusiness.com.
That is it. Yeah. And this is the beginning of a movement. I mean, literally, it's been really exciting talking to you. And I can't commend you high enough for what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And you know what? It is a journey. It's an adventure. Something you said today, I've just written it down. You just said loads of things, but you just said it here. Is a journey we go on together. So whether that's life is a journey we go on together. Team Super Dad is a journey we go on together. Our family, your childhood is a journey we go on together. I think that's beautiful. That is absolutely powerful and beautiful.
Yeah, and that is genuinely how I see it. And once you can see where it is and where you see the waterfalls, then then it becomes easier to work on them together, because we all face those waterfalls, etc. So
love that. So it's just fun again? Swamps, deserts.
Oh, swamps, deserts, mountains, and jungles. I mean, they're all naturally deep, and rivers to cross. But once you can start to identify the river or the mountain, it becomes so much more dynamic and interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I have on my screensaver, I have my map of what I'm going to do with my business. I know, we've got to cross the sort of onto the plateau to where the future is. And the future is around trust, clarity, and agility. That's what people and organizations need. But how do you guide them to thinking that's what they need? Because most people so far have thought the more they can clutter their lives with what they own, the more successful they are and the greater the status. And this has somehow got to be flipped, because it's no longer, it doesn't work anymore.
Well, and that's the brave new world that's going to come out of this.
I know. And that's, let's go and populate it together.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Anthony, we are. I'd definitely love to do some workshops. We didn't even discussed it. Do some workshops inside Team Superdad for the Hero Academy group. And there's the next intakes coming at the beginning of December. So we'll talk about doing that in 2021 and making that happen.
Brilliant.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Words can't really do it justice, really, to have had this hour with you today. My mind crosses to another guy I featured on the podcast called John Hall. He was the youngest captain of a merchant navy ship, and he shared his stories of traversing the seas of the world. Grew up in India. Very. I'm going to introduce the two of you because he is an absolute classic guy, probably very much of the same ilk and age. And I think you two will get on like a house on fire.
I'd love to talk to him. I really would. Yeah.
So hold tight. I'll end this and then we'll say goodbye afterwards. Anthony, pleasure. See you soon.
Thank you very much indeed. Cheers. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.